What was your first response when you saw that 28-point plan from Trump?
Just dumping a 28-point plan on the table publicly like that is a pretty novel way to try to conduct really good diplomacy. The fact that people have come together suggesting now is the time to really get something done, that's great. But Putin isn't at the table. And a lot of indicators are that this is not the moment that he is ready to make peace.
You really believe that there is a potential path here towards
it's not a potential path. There is a path. It may have a divergent, path of another kind here and there as you go, but there is a path, clearly. Both sides need a guarantee that their defense is not being diminished.
The way Trump sees his own role, he appears to see himself as an external referee rather than a backer of Ukraine. Is that fair? And if it's fair, is it a problem?
President Trump obviously has had his differences with President Zelensky.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you...
Well, if Putin's sitting there and he hears that from President Trump, he's going to feel pretty good.
Can Putin be brought to the table? Is that possible?
I personally believe yes. I personally believe yes, absolutely, it can be brought to the table. But I think you've got to really try to do it at a time and in a way that is going to produce a President Putin who is prepared to actually make peace.
Is it not possible that President Obama, the administration you were part of, and subsequent administrations underestimated Putin? When Crimea was annexed.
President Obama always knew that President Putin had very big ambitions and a very clear, disruptive goal. And it was made crystal clear to him that it was going to be costly.
When you look at this process, is there any part of you that wishes you were in the room?
I think anybody in their right mind who's been involved in high-level diplomacy, be involved in trying to make things happen. I still think there are things worth working for and fighting for. So there you go.
I want to ask you about Ukraine. What do you make of the last 6 days since this? What was your first response when you saw that 28-point plan from Trump?
My first response was just dumping a 28-point plan on the table publicly like that is a pretty novel way to try to conduct really good diplomacy and prepare and put together a roadmap that gets you where you really want to go. Now, sometimes it can work. I mean, you can shock people and sometimes you get something going. I think the fact that there have been serious meetings is good. The fact that people have come together suggesting that now is the time to really get something done, that's great. But Putin isn't at the table. And a lot of indicators are that this is not the moment that he is ready to make peace. And so you can have all this sturm and drang over here while people are trying to put together a plan. Putting it together publicly like this, with ultimatums, with very difficult concepts laid on the table that make it difficult for any leader to manage their politics internally, that's difficult stuff. And I'm not sure it's the wisest way to approach really getting something done here.
What would have been a wiser approach?
Well, there are any number. I mean, there's so many models for peace processes that have been set up very meticulously. You can go back in time, to the Vietnam War. Anyway, there are months and months of really hard labor and work to kind of get where they needed to go. I think they could get there quicker in this because a lot of it's been worked out over the last few years. But I think it's, I think you bring Putin to the table, bring Zelensky, say, okay. And you do what they're doing now before you get into this sort of critical back and forth. But
is there not something more fundamental at fault here, which is the way Trump sees his own role? He appears to see himself as an external referee rather than a backer of Ukraine. Is that fair? And if it's fair, is it a problem?
It depends on when that sort of emerges as the perception. For instance, let me be specific. President Trump obviously has had his differences with President Zelensky, and he has held publicly the view that Zelensky doesn't have the cards. Well, if Putin's sitting there and he hears that from President Trump, he's going to feel pretty good that Trump's kind of carrying his water with the guy. And I think you've got to have a sense here that the representation of positions, the trying out of options is being done in a way that doesn't create more political problems and less support, and even send the wrong message to President Putin. President Putin has not made it clear that, he's made it clear what he's not willing to do, and that makes it much more complicated to be able to begin to get at what he is willing to do.
And so how would you assess the Trump administration's approach to handling Ukraine over the last 10 months?
Look, they're in the middle of a tough negotiation, and I know from my own experience, you don't welcome a lot of kibitzers on the sidelines throwing out stuff. So I'm not going to get into the substance of what they should do now or haven't done, and opine. I think it's good they're engaged. I really do. But I would love to see part of the message reflect the toughness that may be necessary with respect to President Putin's options. And if he doesn't believe that it's hard for him to continue, or that he shouldn't continue for major reasons, he'll continue. And I think that makes a lot of this noise just that, noise.
But can Putin be brought to the table? Is that possible?
I personally believe, yes. I personally believe, yes, absolutely, it can be brought to the table. But I think you've got to really try to do it at a time and in a way that is going to produce a President Putin who is prepared to actually make peace. That is not clear.
Can he be brought to the table in a manner which doesn't involve Ukraine giving away huge amounts of its own territory, Ukraine giving away the future option of joining NATO, of joining the European Union? Is that possible?
That's all for the negotiation. I think that's very difficult. I think NATO is extremely difficult. I think that, how much land is going to possibly be given up, depending on the negotiation. Those are the questions. Those are the critical issues here. And you can't really play them out on a daily basis in public. It takes a lot, and without knowing where President Putin is, all the armchair quarterbacks, which I do not intend to be one of, don't have enough knowledge about what the play is with President Putin. Maybe President Trump's received something from him that actually indicates something more. I don't know the answer to that.
So perhaps, in your view, it's unfair, some of this criticism of Trump.
Well, I don't think it was unfair to criticize any of the 28 provisions that you didn't like if it was just put out there for everybody to tackle. And that's fair game. And if you didn't want it to be part of the conversation, I assume you wouldn't have put it out there.
You've been eyeball to eyeball with Putin yourself. You've been in the room with him. You know some of his negotiation team. What is your assessment of them and of their motives?
Well, I don't want to start characterizing motives when this is a moment where you don't want to make this personal. But I think that he has a very capable team around him. He's a very capable person himself. And in the negotiations that I had with him, we managed to find agreements. For instance, on the efforts with Sergei Lavrov that we had to get the chemical weapons out of Syria during a conflict. Never been done before in human history. And we set out to do it with President Obama's and President Putin's encouragement. And we met many times, pulled it together in a short period of time, and got the job done. So I found on a number of different things, the Iran nuclear agreement, President Putin helped. He was part, and so did Sergei Lavrov considerably. So I think there were cooperative efforts that can be elicited depending on how you approach folks. I don't think anybody in the world likes to be approached with ultimatums, with public moments of being embarrassed or whatever. I think you want to be able to substantively work through things because these are really serious issues. And you have to find roads sometime where you work together to find that road, and it leaps out at you in the process of the conversations you're having. It may not even be something that either of you thought would be where you wind up talking. So it's a certain art form to it. It's not just do this or else.
And so perhaps the plan itself wasn't the problem as much as the leaking of the plan.
No, I think I can't give you a percentage of one side or the other. Both things are a problem. And the 28 points, the way they were characterized, I think presented a lot of very serious questions. They've obviously tackled many of those. They have obviously made some progress in sort of arriving at a broad structure. But the place they need to really start here is, it's very difficult for Ukrainians to be at the table while they're continuing to be killed and bombed. You need to get a ceasefire. I mean, that's a starting place. Another starting place is to lay out a sort of broad-based roadmap for where you start. Have a kind of structure, an initial structure, if you will, that you agree on. And then you begin to build something. If you have that kind of a regularized set of meetings and a process. I mean, that's what it takes to have a big negotiation about a big, complicated issue.
When you look back to your time in the administration, do you have regrets about the way that the administration dealt with Putin and the Kremlin at that time?
No, I think President Obama was extremely strong with him and made very clear, we put sanctions. And remember, this was the beginning of the process with this. So you don't go to maximum sanction on day one. You try to send a message very clearly that this is going to be costly. And on several occasions, those sanctions were ratcheted up. So, I think that at the same time, you've got to offer ways to get off the fence, so to speak, and begin to really dig at the really big issues and get a roadmap for how you're going to do it. But starting with a ceasefire here would be particularly helpful. And I think having a sort of first set of steps that you might take to build some confidence would be helpful.
Is it possible that President Obama, the administration you were part of, and subsequent administrations underestimated Putin? You know, when Crimea was annexed, did much of the world, including your own administration, not do enough, not challenge enough, and underestimate the motives and the ambitions of President Putin?
Well, I don't think there was any miscalculation about the motives of President Putin, nor his bigger intentions. Not one scintilla of a misunderstanding there. People understood that he was an adversary and that he needed to be, dealt with in a way that tries to change the behavior. But I think in these kinds of things, you want to try to leave people the space to be able to find a way out. You don't know fully where they're going. But President Obama always knew that President Putin had very big ambitions and a very clear, disruptive goal. And it was made crystal clear to him that it was going to be costly.
Do you have any advice for, you don't want to be an armchair quarterback, as you say, but do you have any advice for Secretary of State Rubio?
No, I think that team just has to find a way to be addressing and be realistic about President Putin and where he comes out here. Maybe they have, as I said earlier, they may well have an indicator about what he might or might not be willing to consider that we in the public don't have any sense of. So I don't want to get into, hypothesizing. Tell
me your most optimistic assessment of Ukraine. It sounds like you really believe that there was a potential path here
Oh, it's not a potential path. There is a path. It may have a divergent, path of another kind here and there as you go, but there is a path, clearly. There is a place that many people who are involved in foreign policy would land and say, this is pretty fair. I.e., you give up something, or you give up this, you give up that, and there is no guarantee for this. So you have, here are the guarantees. We're going to restructure the guarantees. And both sides need a guarantee that their defense is not being diminished, that their deterrence, as President Putin used to tell me. He said, if you put these missiles in my backyard, those missiles are geared to shoot down missiles over here, but you can always turn them and they'll shoot down missiles over here. That changes my deterrence, he said. And I think you have to analyze these things pretty carefully.
What do you say back in that scenario? What did you say back to President Putin in that scenario?
Well, let's not get trapped into something that's really not, that's a broad statement about how this perception process is critical to how you get to an agreement. You don't get to an agreement if both sides aren't satisfied that their basic needs and basic goals are being met. Now, President Putin's basic plan to date is that there'll be no NATO at all, that there'll be, Crimea is his, and Luhansk and so forth, Luhansk and Donbass and other communities, Kherson and so forth. That's not going to happen. So you really need, but you can't get that kind of really big tension resolved in public, because how you resolve it may also have its tensions and may be very difficult. And you may need to do a lot of process politics at home before you even have something like that become public. That's again why these negotiations are better off done without the tension of bombs falling and war going on, therefore ceasefire, and you're better going at it in a very clearly pre-decided and agreed upon roadmap. That's not here. So maybe it's going to come out of these days. I hope it does. This war is a stupid war. It didn't have to happen. It happened because of President Putin's ambition for Russia, and that's all. And Europe obviously has fundamental reasons for standing up and saying, we're not going to give in a way that encourages him, that is in the end going to be more costly and more dangerous for the whole world. So these are big stakes on the table, and I think we have to respect the ability to get there.